listener friends. So today I am going to be sharing with you a very special episode of the Doing Motherhood podcast. This is an episode that means a lot to me in terms of the work that I have always done as working as a nurse, working as a doula. All in all, what I consider my life's work is taking care of women. And so today's episode looks a lot different, sounds a lot different, but I think you'll appreciate the content and the stories. Anyway, so in December, I traveled to Alabama. I visited Birmingham to visit my son for the holidays, but I decided to take a trip out to Montgomery because I had learned of the monument, the Mothers of Gynecology monument that honors Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsey, who were the women, the very young women that Marion Sims used to experiment in order to become the quote unquote Father of Gynecology that he is known to be. And so Michelle Browder is a brilliant artist, historian, cultural curator in Montgomery, Alabama, and she's created and erected a beautiful monument in tribute to Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsey, who we will now forever know as the mothers of modern gynecology. In addition to a conversation with Michelle Browder about the art pieces and really about what brought her to create this monument, we also are going to have a conversation, I had a conversation, and so you get to listen to the conversation with Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, who is now the first certified professional midwife in the state of Alabama since 1976. And you'll get to hear that story of how that came to be. She is also right in the thick of building a new birth center, and it will be the first freestanding birth center in the state of Alabama once it opens, known as the Birth Sanctuary. So both of these women are doing phenomenal work, truly heartfelt passion work that centers and is dedicated to Black women and to Black mothers. And I wanted to share both of their stories and their causes with you. Both are, of course, they are building. So Michelle Browder, the monument is on the Moore campus, which is where she has the monuments. She also has a cultural center and a traveler center. And so, with that opening coming up, she has a grand opening on February 28th. That weekend, there's going to be a lot of conversations about the state of Black maternal health and Black women's health in general. So there are efforts that you can donate to. Please look into if you're going to be in the Montgomery area, or if you are in the, Montgomery, Birmingham, Alabama in general area, pay a visit there. There's so much to learn. She has created a beautiful space in honor of Black women and mothers. And Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, as I said, is currently building the Birth Sanctuary, and so she's accepting donations. She is creating a legacy walk, and so you can buy a brick for yourself or your organization or your family's name to be a part of the legacy that her birth center is going to bring. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoy this episode. Talk soon. So Michelle, it's so nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Thank you for allowing us to come and visit with you and tour and learn about Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsey. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'd like to start. How did you first learn of Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsey?
I was in college at the Art Institute of Atlanta. I was about 18, 19 years old, somewhere in there. And there was a photo of a painting from the Robert Tom collection.
Okay.
And he was an artist who would, show the depictions of operations. And so one of his famous photos or paintings, that of Anarcha Lucy.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Of Anarcha Lucy and Betsey. And that's when I first learned of the mothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I'd seen in one of your previous interviews, you mentioned you kept hearing the story of Sims and seeing him recognized as the father of gynecology.
Yeah.
And your question was, who are the mothers? So did you go on your own concerted effort to find the documents of these women, or how did you come about that?
I did. So once I came back, I moved to Montgomery, Alabama in 2002. Started a youth organization, started mentoring kids in high school and college, and I wanted to teach them the history, because unfortunately all of us weren't taught this history.
We didn't get it
unless you went to one of those type schools, and I didn't go. And so basically I started doing tours so that I could help support my youth initiative.
Oh.
Started doing the research on Marion Sims, because all of the iconography around the city, and there he was at our state's capitol, and I just kind of dove into that history and for what I could find. But at that time there were other people like Harriet Washington, who wrote the book Medical Apartheid. Later on, there was Dietrich Cooper Owens, who wrote Medical Bondage. And I just started, it was almost as if there was a calling for people to start talking about these women even more. And so there was a gentleman that was traveling the South, looking for information, doing information on Anarcha, and we connected in 2015.
Okay.
And his name is J.C. Hallman. They did a lot of research on these mothers, but in particular Anarcha.
Okay.
And so from there we decided to, partner on some things. And so, yeah.
Wow.
Found a lot of information.
Wow. What can you tell us about any of the three of them? Is there anything that stood out to you in the research about them?
Well, and for Anarcha, to go through 30 surgeries, experimentations without anesthesia, you're enslaved, you're a kid. She was 17. She was 17 at the time of her first experimentation. She was pregnant, and Marion Sims actually delivered her baby. With that, I wanted people to realize that these were girls, they were children that would have babies having babies, and of course they were enslaved, so therefore there was no conformed consent for them, or informed consent for him to do what they did. But they were enslaved, so you can't even make that argument. But one of the things as far as the design is I wanted people to know that they were not just girls, but their hair was their identity. So the first thing you do is you strip them of their identity. And that's the first thing I wanted to do, was give them their identity back. So I envisioned Anarcha with braids. Each one of them has an Adinkra symbol, which is an African, you won't be able to pull it up, okay? Each one of them have an Adinkra symbol from West Ghana, which Anarcha's is that of Goddess Supreme. She's in a state of prayer. So if you notice, her eyes are closed and her head is tilted back. This is Betsey. Her symbol is that of strength. And the Latin word for respect means to look again. So hence the red glasses. We need you to see us again. Because right now Black women are dying. They're 3 to 4 times likely to die from the complications of childbirth. Why is that? There's systemic racism in healthcare. We need to talk about it. Thank God for COVID to a certain extent, because now we know that when a doctor, Sandra, says that she knows that something is wrong with me, and she knows how to prescribe the medicine that she needs, but yet she still died because they thought she was a drug addict. We got problems in healthcare. So one of the reasons why we want to address this, and she's pregnant. So Betsey is pregnant And Kira Johnson, her name is on here. There's an act called the Mommy Bus Act where Congress is now starting to listen to the fact that we need to change some things in healthcare, systemic racism in healthcare. And so her case really is kind of elevating the process. But I wanted this mother to reflect Naomi Osaka, who's now talking about mental health, right? It's okay for us to have this conversation about the trauma that we're suffering. Angela Davis. People don't know that every woman on this planet has been touched by a black woman. How is that? Because the woman who invented the maxi pad was a black woman. Her name is Mary Beatrice Kenner Davis. Did you know that?
No. Did not.
Thank you, black woman, for your
Did not. We are so grateful.
To draw attention, Coretta Scott King, even though she was Martin Luther King's wife, where's her story? She was an opera singer. She was gifted. She was a creative. Why don't we talk more about these women, the backbone of the family? So about them.
Yeah, we were just saying that over at the Peace Center. Stephanie, the midwife, she said, you have to think about what they were running out into. And what she said, like, I don't even want to walk in my backyard without shoes on, right? And to think that for those who just, they woke up one day and were like, no more of this. And the amount of courage that takes to run off into the unknown.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
30 surgeries at 17 years old.
Well, yeah, up until, the time when she left, and the census follows her. I think there's one other document to the time of her death, but she went on to be married, and, J. Marion Sims claims that he actually cured her, but he didn't. And she continued to have these surgeries, and so, people make the argument, she followed him. The woman was enslaved, so she didn't just follow him.
Right.
She
was property. That was taken.
Chattel slavery. Hello. And then, these plantations that would birth, forced birth plantations, breeding plantations.
Yeah.
So they were worth more alive to have more and more commodities,
right.
Children, to replenish the stock. So to know that, J. Marion Sims delivered her first baby, and then to be the subject of this constant abuse, it says a lot about that individual.
What I find interesting, and this is just in my own, like I said, I came into the story of Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsey. That had to be 2016 or 2017. And at the same time, even though I had come from working as an OBGYN nurse, I left the medical establishment for many a reason. But
there's no racism there.
But
no.
So much of it, what we understand, is systemic violence, dismissiveness, just and I want people to know that experimentation on Black bodies continues to this day.
Oh, absolutely.
This is not just, we're not only talking about the past, but so, I learned of Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsey in about 2016 or 17. That's the same time I started to learn that we are in a maternal health crisis in this country, even though I had been working in OBGYN for so long, right? But I didn't understand, that until I got out, until I left.
Okay.
Right? And so I wonder, what do you make of where we are in terms of maternal health today, and how that's connected to their history?
Yeah, we're in a crisis.
We're
in a crisis. Hello. State of emergency. Black women are dying 3 to 4 times likely to die from the complications of childbirth.
And in some places as high as 12. Like New York City is 12 times.
Come on now. I have not heard that.
Yeah.
So we are in a crisis. Because if you have no mothers, what happens to a culture? What happens to Black people? And so with this maternal health crisis, I'm hoping that we could raise conversation of this, systemic racism, but also trauma.
Yeah.
Generational trauma with the fibroids that we're seeing. Why is it prevalent in Black women? Why are Black women dying for the sake of and needless deaths? You look at Kiara Johnson, you know her,
Yes.
and Serena Williams.
Yes.
So let's talk about this hate.
And so many others.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Names that they pop up so frequently.
Absolutely. And some of these things are preventable. Serena prevented her own death.
Yes.
Because she spoke up. Kiara was trying to speak up.
Right.
And ultimately she lost her life. So a lot of it, as you said, with systemic racism, let's change the narrative in the way we care for people of color, Black women.
Absolutely.
And so with that, that's what I know the problem is.
Yeah.
Not being believed when someone says, I'm in pain. Not having the systemic or the generalization that, oh, you must be a drug addict. The woman with COVID,
yes,
who's a doctor, who's like, I'm a doctor, I know what I need.
Yes.
And she died anyway.
Yes.
So, needless death
Yes.
around this childbirth. So, yeah, we're in a state of emergency.
That's one of the, when I started as a nurse in the Army. And then I grew up in the Army, so my whole life was Army, and we were in that world, because it's definitely a subset, right? And then I came into civilian world, and healthcare, which is everyone in the military has healthcare. Everyone in the military, I won't say everyone is, we at least have the access, and we have access to quality healthcare, right there. And then I came out of the military and I lived in New York City. And one of the things that I kept seeing in the newspapers was Black women dying just after being put out of a hospital.
Come on.
Black woman called for help and she was sent back home. She begged to stay in the hospital because she knew something wasn't right, and then she got home and died that night. And I don't think that people, and part of the reason why I left the medical community to do doula work is because I don't think that we, Black people, Black women, I don't think we even have the history, a lot of us, to connect that the experimentation that happened on them, the dismissiveness, right, the not caring about their pain and what they were experiencing through these, it's the same mentality.
Absolutely.
And it, yes, we're 200 years away from whenever this happened or however long, but what's written in those books is what carries it through, right?
The books, medical journals, and absolutely.
And so it's written in the book, this is what they learn, and so that becomes the culture. And I know a lot of Black women, I'll hear Black women today say, well, that's why I'm looking for a Black doctor. That's why I'm looking for a Black doctor. And we would like to think that that would be what saves us. But we have to remember that it's embedded in the culture. So anyone learning in that system is likely to carry some sort of bias, right? Implicit or usually implicit, we hope. Hopefully not explicit, right? What made you decide to create the sculpture?
You don't want to know that for real. You do not want to see that. There's a trigger. There's a trigger. You're thinking. Well, I will tell you, since we're talking about humanity and the lack thereof, because basically that's what these experimentations, right? And why people still treat us the way they treat us today is because they don't see us.
Yeah.
Or they see what the stereotype, Black, angry, loud, disruptive, brash. That's what they think we are. That's what you see on television.
And non-deserving.
Thank you.
Because of those stereotypes, non-deserving of quality care, non-deserving even of just attention.
Absolutely. And so that's what happened to me about 2 years ago. I started my business in 2016. It's enough to live in the South. So enough to deal with racism, nice racism, aggression, microaggressions, just flat out dogmatic white folk. I'm just gonna be honest with you because you brought it up.
Listen, we're here.
But then there's another situation when you deal with black folk,
Okay.
who tell you that you don't belong at the table. And I found myself in the presence of billionaires, and I was their guide. I was there, and I was told I didn't belong there.
By other black folk.
Powerful black people. That was a trigger. I grew up in racism.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school with racism. I was told in college that my portfolio was too black by a white man.
Okay.
I got triggers.
Uh-huh.
Then I come here and I deal with the same racism, and then I get something totally different because I'm a black woman from people of color at 48 years old. That was a trigger. I would never call their name because I respect them to no end. That was a trigger. And with these women, I want people to see that they were women, they were children, they had pain, they suffered. But through it all, that's why we have to be strong so many times, because who's being strong for us? Who's speaking on our behalf? Who's allowing us to have our say? So that's what happened to me. And during COVID, I'm a creative, I'm an artist. So either I die, I'm not giving tours.
Right.
I decided to learn how to weld during COVID. And I put all of that hurt and pain that I experienced 2 years prior into making sure that these women are seen. Because when you look up and you look up, you're not.
It's tall. I mean, 15 feet.
Yes, ma'am. You look up. You don't look down on black women. And that's what has been happening with us since we got to this continent. You know, since we came Turtle Island, as the indigenous people say. So that was a trigger.
Wow. So truly born of the pain of racism.
And from my own. I could deal with the Confederate. I could deal with Jim Crow. But when I have to deal with us, it's a whole nother.
Right.
It's a whole nother situation.
Right.
You know, that's a whole nother color issue that we have to deal with black men who think less of us. It's painful. So I gave birth.
I appreciate you for sharing that. That's yeah.
And I said I would never talk about it, but there are some things that black women that we're going through that, you know, you're cutting us. It's a two-edged sword, you know, and so
until we get to a point where it's like, when is enough enough?
Absolutely.
We were brought to this country. We were forced, first of all, in bondage, but then in bondage, forced to be the mothers of all. White women and their babies.
Absolutely. Think of that mental illness.
In addition to our own. And then we come through everything that we've been through since slavery was abolished, right? And in 2021, now we can't even, it's like we still can't get proper medical care just for being a human being who's ill. We can't rely on our medical system to keep our babies alive unless the doctor looks exactly like us.
Right.
And even still, you know, maybe not.
But all that comes from, for white folks, this mentality was embedded in the journals that black women don't feel pain,
right?
Or that we have a high tolerance. And then even with your caricatures, Big Mama, you know, the mammies. They were strong, big black women.
Yes.
Which would denote that we feel pain. So I think until we start, the Latin word for respect means to look again. Until people look again at us, we're going to continue to be the loud. She doesn't need no attention.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the doctor. I had an accident, and the nurse she had her stethoscope, and she was just barely. I was like, girl, if you don't touch my chest, what? Scared.
And you're like, why are you doing this work? Why are you doing this
I was
work?
like, sis, you're gonna have to press down a little further to get that point. You understand what I'm saying? It's like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I had a similar medical incident. I was actually at the hospital in the hospital system that I worked for. I worked at a different hospital, and I was being seen at the hospital close to my home, and they kept telling me, you either have an STD. I was married, my husband was right by my side. You either have an STD, or they never said what the or was, but I knew what they were. They were thinking that I was a drug seeker, that I was just in there looking to get a fix. So they hooked me up to some morphine overnight and sent me home the next day, and it turns out my appendix was ruptured. There's a whole story. The only reason they knew my appendix was ruptured was because I demanded, but I had to fight to get this CT scan. That doctor never listened to my lungs. He never touched me. He never did any type of examination. Just kept telling me, oh, I'm pretty sure it's, if it's not your IUD, it's an STD, or you just need to follow up with your doctor on Monday. This was a Friday night. And Saturday night, they called me back and said my appendix ruptured. 24 hours after they had done it. So they never read it, but they told me it was normal.
Look again. Respect.
And that's also why this podcast used to be the Interculture podcast. And I had this idea that I wanted, all women to, it was noble. It was a noble cause. But 2020, once George Floyd was murdered, at first it was Ahmaud Arbery, and I lost that. He was just before the pandemic. Then the pandemic starts. Then George Floyd. Then we learn of Breonna Taylor. And in the conversations that were happening, I said to myself, I'm not talking about other women, because it's clear to me that this nation is misinformed about who Black women are, who we are as human beings, who we are as mothers, who we are as community members. And so it just really became important to me to start having conversations that center us and focus on us, because it's not out there.
Right. But who wrote that narrative, though? There's a narrative that people play into all the time. The not so real Housewives of Atlanta. I'm sorry, y'all. I mean, that might be your show. But let me. I was traveling. I was in DC, and I like to stay at hostels, or I used to.
Yeah.
You know what a hostel?
Yeah.
And there were some people there from Australia, and I was sitting downstairs, and I was reading. This was about maybe 8 years ago. And a lady from Australia, we were talking, and she was like, well, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. And she was like, oh, Rosa Parks. Everybody knows Rosa. And then she says, and we talked more, and she says, oh, you're so nice. I was like, thank you. She said, you're nothing like what we see on television. She's in Australia. They love the Real Housewives of Atlanta. So all that catfighting and vitriol, that's not who we are.
When that show first came out, I had a lot of friends that were into it, and they'd call me and I'd be like, girl, I don't care to know. I'm glad you're entertained. That's not my choice of entertainment. But my concern at that time was exactly that, that most white people only know of us what they see on television. I mean, I grew up with teachers that would tell us they didn't meet black people until they went to college. They weren't even sure that black people were real because they only saw them on TV. So when those Housewives shows came out, I was like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous for black women. Because if this is all certain subsets of the nation sees of black people, this is what we are all going to be labeled as.
There it is.
And it's going to be a problem.
Yes.
And do you know, fast forward, I feel like I spoke it into my own existence, but I had just gotten promoted to a practice manager. So I was running a practice of 4 white women physicians and 1 male physician he's an Indian man. And those white women, let me tell you. But what was the thing for me, and this is eventually why, it's the biggest part of why I left working in the medical field, was because they just started pulling out lies. And the lie that like really just, most of them I was like, girl, please, right? Like,
right.
All right, this is what they do. Fine. The one that got me the most was that they called my manager to say that I was terrifying my staff because I was going through the office every day, slamming doors and throwing things at people. It never happened.
Wow.
Right? It never happened. So my manager comes to sit with me and she says, this is what they told me happened. And I said, so I need to know that you know that is untrue. And then she wanted me to like give her, I was like, there's no story. Nothing happened. We had a regular normal day. And then I said to her, this white woman, I said, and if I had been behaving that way, you think these 4 white women, I said this to her, you think these 4 white women wouldn't have called security to have me out of here? They waited until the next day to call you? Or to send it to you in an email? I said, I need to hear you say that you know that this is untrue.
That you believe me.
And she couldn't say it. She wouldn't say it. And so, back to that look again. And yeah, and the narratives, you know? So I'm just so happy to know, I'm happy to see that there are women, those of us that will have, that are willing to tell these stories, right? And to even come in, it's born out of pain. Right? This podcast exists, and I left my doula practice exists because I couldn't take the pain of being in that system anymore.
Yes.
Right? And to hear you tell the story. Blatant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Blatant and willful. Yeah. So what would you want Black mothers specifically, like when we're talking about this history, we're talking about the current maternal health crisis that is happening, or just in general the way that Black people are handled, what do you hope Black mothers would take away from learning about these 3 women?
That you deserve the best health care. Mentally, physically, spiritually, the overall holistic part of you. You deserve the best care possible. And so there's a space when you're looking at Lucy, there's a hole in Anarcha. But there's a certain spot where you can go and stand and you look through the hole and you'll understand why we're angry. I subscribe to being an angry Black woman now. I have every right. We have every right.
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I have white people to go and stand at a certain spot because you got to be in place. You got to be able to see this.
Yeah.
And I happen to stand there, and they look through the hole, and you see Lucy's face. The trauma, the disrespect, the inhumane things that have happened to us. So I want Black mothers to know, forget what people think about you. This is your body, your care, and if you're going to be labeled angry Black woman, then so be it. You're bringing in life.
Because speaking of Kira, what we hear her husband say, or when in his retelling of the story of her death, which was preventable, what we hear him say is that he wanted to fight. He wanted to say something, and she did not. She was reserved because she didn't want his fight to label her as the angry Black woman. And when I work as a doula, that happens it just happened a few weeks ago. It happens all the time where we know something's wrong, someone's not paying attention, they were supposed to come back 2 hours ago, no one has been back in the room to check, and either myself as the doula, because I don't mind, because baby, I do not mind, okay?
Absolutely.
But a lot of times the husband as well. You know, her husband will say, no, this isn't right. I'm going to go find somebody. And my client will say, no, please, just please, let's not make a big deal. Because for her, she's thinking, and you understand it, right? I understand her standpoint of, let's not make a big deal right now because I still have to go. I still have to have this baby.
Yes.
And not only do I have to have this baby, but I'm going to be here for a day or two after. And whatever they put in that chart is how I'm going to be treated, right? But at the same time, you know, and I'm sure anyone in the situation rethinks it, but it's like if he had just thrown a fit in the middle of the hospital floor, right? Like or if he had demanded to see whomever, you know, patient relations, or get the CEO in here if you have to, right? Like, would that have made a difference? So I appreciate you saying, like, we absolutely deserve to be angry Black women. That's why I say, like, I came out of a military world, and the only thing I can say about it is just naive. So naive because anytime I had a sniffle, we could just walk into a clinic and be taken care of.
Right.
So that for me to come out into civilian world and just see story after story that Black women are dying on sidewalks outside of hospitals, that this homeless woman is like banging on chairs to try to get attention, and people are continuing their work as if she doesn't exist. And we do deserve.
We do. So
by virtue of being alive.
Absolutely. So in that, we need you to look again.
Yeah.
We need you to respect. And I think Aretha said it better. RESPECT.
Find out what it means to me. Not what you.
Absolutely.
Not what they.
Right. But to me.
To me.
And that means quality health care. We do better going to Cuba to have our children. But yet we're the greatest country on earth.
Let me tell you something. I'm in these expat groups because I plan to be an expat. Okay, I want to go to Mexico.
Nice.
So in doing my research, I've gone into a couple of groups to ask, because there are Black families, they're moving their families out of the U.S. to go to Mexico, right? Young Black women at childbearing age. So my question to them in the group is, are you coming back to the States to have your babies, or are you staying in Mexico? Everybody.
Oh, no.
Everybody. I will be in Mexico having I'm not coming back to the U.S. to have my baby.
No, ma'am.
With that, not one person said they would come back to the U.S.
No, ma'am. Stay over there.
And that's the crazy part of the crisis, is that not only is it that that Black women are being treated less, but overall, all women are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all women we're not faring well through this crisis, but we pay more than any other country.
Yes.
So you would think that we would have better treatment.
And we don't have quality health care in this country. And everybody doesn't have it.
We do not.
And we're the only country that doesn't.
Right.
But you want to give us some. You want to give us Moderna now, and Johnson & Johnson, and you're concerned about this. But if we were truly concerned about people, you would make sure that everyone has access to health care.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone. So I'm just looking at this thing a little different.
Will you tell us about your trolley? This is so beautiful.
So the trolley is another angry black woman situation. But it's African, as you can tell. The mud cloth for the seats. We have the fabric, the African fabric for the seats, and then of course the fans. And this is my Anarcha and Betsey mobile that I named after my mom. So it's called the Buena Vista. Beautiful view. Yep. And it's all about black women. Can you get a picture of your mom standing there by Oni Lee Logan, who was a
midwife in Alabama.
Yeah.
Okay. They told her just out of nowhere, like, you're done with midwifery.
Yeah.
You're done. You can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
You need certificates, and now you've got to do all these things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And she was the last one,
Mm-hmm.
1976.
Yep.
And after her,
Yeah.
me, no.
Yeah, really?
No, but seriously,
No,
you,
it is.
yes.
They told her to go back to Africa.
Yeah, I mean,
That's my thing about her. She was like, "You go. I ain't never been."
yeah, she was tough.
She was tough.
Yes.
So today I am with Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, who is the first certified professional midwife in Alabama. And soon she will also be opening the first freestanding birth center in the state of Alabama. We have been internet friends for going on 4 years or something like that now, and it's my first time meeting her in person. So if I look beside myself, okay, I'm just so happy to see
Thank you so much. It's so much fun. And I'm like listening to you like the first CPF. She is.
Okay.
She opening the first birth center. She is.
And do
also
it.
and
Okay.
what?
And we're gonna be here for all of it.
So excited. It's so good to
I'm
see
so
you in
excited
person.
for you.
It's unbelievable. Cause like I know you exist, but to see you in the flesh is so
Right.
nice. It's so nice.
It's just a different thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's a
yeah.
different thing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just I'm so glad that we get to have this interview in the trolley as well, because this entire thing is amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
Right?
Yes. I mean, I definitely shed tears over there at the other monument. Like, it's just so heavy when you really start taking those steps and reading those names, and it's just emotionally heavy. It's
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah,
I'm like, let me take a few seconds of a breather to kind of take that all in. But
that's what I said. I still have like 5 days before I have to get back to real life.
so let me decompress this real quick.
I'm glad I'm getting it in and then get to go home and work through it.
That's exactly right.
Right.
For real.
So I think I want to start with, because when I first met you online, you were working as a certified nurse midwife in Boston, working for what I think you coined the term medical industrial complex, the MIC.
Mm-hmm.
That's what connected. I was like, bitch, I got out of there.
I was like, I know exactly what she's describing. Yes, I want to say it was Rich and Barb Erlock or something like that. Some old white research couple that coined that term in the, I want to say 1970s. But what really brought it back to fruition was exactly my working in the space, which was a hospital space, but it really was emphasized, in the way that it was working was exactly what the definition is of a medical industrial complex. So I grabbed on hold of that term and I said, that let it be known. Let the people be known that this is exactly what you're getting and the reasons why those spaces are coined as such. So that's where I was at, and I was like, not at all. We're not doing this for the long term.
Right. So what made you what was the decision, or how did you come to the decision? This isn't it. And then, you know, some people like myself, I was like, I'm out of here, and I just left it. I was like, I'm gonna go do this doula work. But what made you say Alabama is where we need to be?
So a lot of this is by happenstance, but what isn't by happenstance is the fact that I knew I was always going to be in an out-of-hospital birth space. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I knew it could be home birth, and I knew it could be birth center birth, but I knew that that was where I would best be served. And so what moved us from Boston, Massachusetts to Gainesville, Alabama was a job opportunity for my husband. And it's actually back in his same hometown of Gainesville, Alabama. That's where he was born and raised, where the opportunity presented itself for him to open a restaurant. So, as anybody does, when they're moving across country, the very first thing is you sit down and you plot out where the kid's gonna go to school, where am I gonna work, what am I gonna do for myself and for life. And so what I noticed really quickly was that Alabama did not have the same landscape for out-of-hospital births. As a matter of fact, they didn't even have the same landscape for midwifery. And it was during this time, my pre-move, in 2018, 2019, where I started doing more research on the place that I was going, that I found out that midwifery was all but illegal for out-of-hospital births in the state of Alabama. They were locking midwives up as recent as 2018 and putting them in jail for attendance at out-of-hospital births. So as I started digging in, I really got to get a true sense of how inhospitable of a landscape I was going to be stepping into.
Okay.
And so I moved, because that's not going to change anything. So I moved, and then I realized that there was no space for out-of-hospital midwifery as for a certified nurse midwife. Because of the way that the legislation is set up. So you got a choice to make.
Yeah.
Do you go to the nearest medical industrial complex and put yourself to work in the same sort of capacity that you were working before, which has been found to be harmful, specifically to Black women? Or do you step out and say, okay, well, I know that there are alternatives, so I'm gonna go ahead and create the alternative since there are none.
Yeah.
And so I decided that that's what I was gonna do, was create an alternative. Because everybody knows that the origination of labor and birth in this country was actually in Alabama. It was in the Black Belt. It was in the South. So this is not something that is a foreign thing.
And it was Black women.
That's the part that truly floored me, is that not only is this the origination, but it has now been so stripped away and hidden and made inaccessible. It just truly floored me. So it is by happenstance that I needed to become a certified professional midwife. And it just so happens that the time that I stepped place into Alabama, that I would be the first, which is wild to me. It's crazy to me, because I didn't go shooting for that. I didn't look for that. I got here, and that's what it was
2021.
like. In 2021. I landed here. And this is what the landscape is like.
Come on, Plymouth Rock.
It don't, yeah. I just got here, and this is what it was like.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of learn to work with what you were given. And part of that working with what I was given was the creation of a birth center space.
And isn't that the story of Black women anyway?
Say that.
Working with what we were given. So what does that look like for you? Because I know, for one, you had an ordeal to even be able to practice here, right? So what does that look like in terms of meeting the credential, and then what is it to open a birth center here now that you're at that point?
So the crazy part, just briefly, is as a certified nurse midwife, in order to be a CPM, I had to be in attendance at a certain amount of births and have so many continuity clients. So it's kind of like checking off the tick box, but it really became problematic, because what I'm essentially doing is I'm trying to prove my competency as a midwife, because of legislation that's in place, when the reality is I already have the competency as a midwife. I've proven that. I've already done that. And so for some organizations and folks who really don't know any better, but are really good at blocking accessible care, decided that no, this is the type of midwife you need to be, a CPM midwife. So a lot of that was just the difficulty in obtaining that different certification, the CPM certification. So in order to do that, there was no midwives available in the state of Alabama to help me with that process. And so I went to the greater internet world and put my needs out on what it is that I need so that I can make that transition from a CNM to a CPM. And I ended up going to Arizona for the greater part of the year, and then taking up residence there for about a month in July so that I could meet those requirements that they needed to become that certified professional midwife. Which is huge disservice, actually, when you think about the scope of practice of certified professional midwives and the type of individuals that they're able to care for, and on the length and duration of their reproductive journey. So it really is a limited scope, and there's a lot of limitations, in fact, in terms of being a prescriber, being able to see folks throughout their reproductive course, and all of these things. There's a lot of barriers in place. But anyway, like you said,
but what we do,
because what you gonna do though? Like, what are your options? What are your options? You could sit down and roll over and say, well, this is how it is. I don't believe in that. Just because that's how it is doesn't mean that's the way that it is supposed to be. And it doesn't mean that you got to sit here and accept that. It means this is wrong, and we know that it's wrong fundamentally because we understand about the relationship of midwifery care and the outcomes for Black women. So we understand that relationship. And in general, like, you could be anybody. Everybody knows this. And so when you see that there's a blockage to it, it's like, do you say, well, that's all right, that's okay, lock up midwives, make it illegal, criminalize midwifery? No, you don't.
And especially in the space of an ongoing maternal health crisis.
Child, like, how dare you? How dare anyone?
Yeah.
Like, midwifery is an ancient and art that is mixed with modern medicine. And it is not new. It is not, witchery or witchcraft. This is not something people have made up. There's a historical basis for it. Outcomes have been documented for centuries. This is how people came. So it's not like this new and surprising thing called midwifery. This midwifery has always been here.
Right.
And so it's wild to me that we're even in the space that we are in the state of Alabama that even had the audacity, being the third worst in maternal outcomes and newborn outcomes. The mortality rate is abysmal. It's the third worst in the country, right? But when you think about where the United States country stands, we're the last of the last. So if you're the bottom of the last, what basis, what is the evidence that you're standing on to try and further restrict accessible care that improves outcomes? There is no basis.
And I came into this work, I was sharing with Michelle earlier, while working in the MIC, did not have an understanding of the maternal health crisis as it is. It was when I left that my eyes were like, oh, this is what's happening?
Yes.
And realizing that a lot of healthcare workers, myself included in that, work inside these institutions. I always say believing we're wearing the white hat, right? Back to, what's the show? Kerry Washington.
Oh, Miss Olivia Pope, what's her name?
Yes. But anyway, they talked a lot about the good white hat.
Right.
We're wearing the white hat. No, they think they're wearing the white hat. And I believe that that's the issue with with maternal health. That inside the system, they believe they're wearing the white hat, and they believe that they're like protecting women from something.
It's certainly
but
ego-driven. It's ego-driven for sure, and it's not reflective. Like you said, the numbers don't speak to that.
The numbers do not speak to that. So now that you're going to be practicing here, what do you hope to see, like, in the next 5 years for birth in Alabama?
So midwifery needs to be expanded. And that means that I'll do my part, and other midwives need to do their due diligence as well in getting a share and an active part of being the precepting entities for the new and student midwives that are up and coming. That is the only way to do it. I had to, like I said, I had to leave Alabama, go to Arizona, back and forth. That is a barrier. I was fortunate enough and had enough family support that I was able to do that. That's not feasible. That's not how you get more midwives.
Right.
You get more midwives by making the space hospitable and making it so that it is accessible. So these are the goals. We've got to get more midwives on the field as active working midwives so that they can work in their own community. That's number one. But number two, the reality of the situation is that legislation and restriction of midwifery practice for those who are advanced practitioners, CNMs namely, independent practice is a must. It has to occur. Now that's a way bigger battle. There are powers that may be and entities and individuals who would like to see that not happen, and they'd like to say, oh, go make more CPMs, and leave it at that. And like I said before, yeah, that's a piece of it, but you are no longer going to be able to marginalize and take over and have this ownership of midwifery, which you don't own. You don't have that. It's not yours to have. And so there is this stronghold that medicine has tried to, and historically have done to try to overtake and control midwifery. And that was the origins, in fact, of needing certifications, was the fact that the boards of medicine said unto midwives that they were dirty, they were hygienic, they weren't smart, they didn't know how to do these things, and they needed physician oversight.
Meanwhile,
Ciao.
Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsey are over here, who were being experimented on, no pain medication, and it's like, so that's the actual beginning of medicine.
You say that.
In this field, right? And so when we're talking about them being experimented on hundreds of years ago to today, and then hearing, like having this dichotomy of medicine good, midwifery, ooh.
Right. It is really the change of when birth was taken out of the home and brought into this industrial setting. And it's always been under the guise of misogyny, of male-dominated science that never really quite added up to the output. So it's like they're doing all of these things, but we're not getting what we need as in recompense. And it's continued, as we see, like with the enslaved women who were surgically experimented on, namely for the benefit, they said, of modern gynecology. But it just goes on to reiterate how Black bodies have been viewed throughout this area of medicine as disposable, as not having a say, as things being done to you. And that is perpetuated today. We don't see it in the same type of way. We're unanesthetized necessarily, unconsented surgery. Maybe it's not as harsh, but the exact same way and treatment that Black bodies are being provided, the way that when they show up pregnant at the medical industrial complex, it's the exact same sort of thing that's being perpetuated. And folks don't like to make that go out of that.
They don't.
Right.
And I tell people, I say it all the time, and sometimes I feel like people are looking at me like, if she don't, this is, that's a lot. But it's like, yo, they're still experimenting on us today. This isn't Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsey.
It's way more insidious. It's way more insidious. And I can just tell you, like, in some of the ways that it is insidious is when you have individuals that, might even go to a community health center, but the main individuals who are working at that health center are maybe residents or medical students or some sort of practice that's set up for learners, which is fine. We all gotta learn somewhere. Why you gotta set it up in the poor Black community? And why are we not having consent in the right type of way? Like, these consensual conversations never include the full description of what it means for you to maintain your autonomy in this place. It never includes that. It's kind of, and so we see this very much like Lucy and Betsey and Anarcha, those type of ways. But what we see now are very insidious replications of what these women still went through. So it's important for us to continue to talk about it.
And I'll just share, because I don't think I've ever shared this on my podcast or even in my work as a doula, right? But one of the things that shook me to my core when I was working in medicine, and at this point I wasn't working as a nurse any longer. Well, I was working in administration, but they wanted to start an in-office procedure clinic so that they could do this specific procedure was e-shores, right? So they're doing e-shores, and I worked in the private clinic, but they were sending women from the public health clinic to our office to have these procedures. E-shore is a permanent form of birth control. It's equivalent to having your tubes tied or cut, but you can have it done in the office and you don't have to, go through general surgery or general anesthesia to have it. Very first case, this woman, she was in her early 30s maybe. She had just had her 5th baby. Her husband was with her. All the consent forms had been signed and everything by the time she got to me. So I did, the spiel for what's going to happen today, and we go forward. Couldn't happen, right? Just the doctor couldn't visualize both fallopian tube openings. And so we had to pause it and say, not today, you'll come back in a few weeks. But then she called back later to ask, well, I don't understand why you couldn't finish it today. So I went on explaining, because if, we can't sterilize one side and not the other. And she was like, sterilize?
See what I'm saying? Yep.
And so I was like, I'm like, yeah, that's what the e-shore procedure is. And she was like, so you're telling me, right? So we're both coming to this realization at the same moment, like,
had I done this? And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations, because we can sit here and when you sometimes have, important seeming people in white jackets, first of all, they could be talking about all these things, but sometimes people feel like they can't ask questions. Like you're looked at as like stupid, like, oh, I should know this. So I'm not gonna ask.
I asked her, I said, did you not realize? She said, no one ever said to me that this is permanent. And I asked her, what did they tell you? And they told me this will be a good birth control for you. You should try this.
Wow. And that is something that happens, continues to happen. She's not the first one.
Of course not.
Okay.
And I caught a whole lot of them before that. You know what I mean? So like, then I go on this mission.
So then you gotta say, like, look, this
but
is
then you know what happened?
Irreversible.
I got moved to another office.
I didn't like that shit. I was like, wait a minute.
Next thing you know, give her black ass.
It's like, yeah, you would sit up here messing up our numbers. We had to sterilize these people.
But that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point.
But that's the point.
And it happens to this day. And we would be ridiculous to not have these conversations, and they're uncomfortable. And people don't, but nobody's here lying. Ain't nobody making up stuff. The problem is, listen to Black women, number one, so that when we start telling you of these other things, or that's the main point. So when people are like, listen to Black women, why we want you to listen to us? What's the reason?
One, because we have the truth.
Okay. Number one.
One, because we hold the truth.
We hold the truth for ourselves. We have been determined to be truth tellers in terms of our bodies. Okay, and so it still is amazing to me to this day when people have concerns for their own health and their own well-being, and it is sidestepped because people have not done the number one first fundamental thing, which is listen to Black women. Do that first, then you can go on and get to the other stuff. But we still struggling on that first little piece here. So that's why these conversations are important, to expand your exposure. Some people need Black exposure therapy. They just have not had the ability and the luxury to be around circles that are not comprised of individuals that are exactly like all the subsets areas of their lives. And so it becomes very difficult
and
to
what's
transition
in the books
into
that is very easy to see and read about themselves, but we don't see it for ourselves.
Because it's not a concern. That piece isn't a concern. And they're I would say like the Anglo physician route is not one that has historically been based in the need for you to understand Black women or folks in general. Like, you don't, empathy is not part of it.
Yeah.
It's a very scientific, rote sort of thing, which works really well if you're doing, like, say, brain surgery, right? You need that scientific rote. But when we look at things in terms of women's health and gynecologic issues and things that don't work in those sorts of rote ways, and we start to have a problem, because then you have the scientist, the doctor, who's based in black, white, not empathy, and it doesn't transition. It doesn't. It's not the same conversation.
It doesn't
it's
serve us. It does not serve us. In fact,
It doesn't.
that's why the numbers are what they are,
It's-
because it is a true disservice to us. What do you most want Black women to know about the birth landscape as it is today?
In the state of Alabama, I would go ahead and say, but it could probably be translated into a national conversation. But what I'd like you to know about the labor and birth process, is that what it is? Or about
Or just
pregnancy
the
in general,
landscape,
the
like,
landscape of it?
yeah, like, you know, we have our choices, because everyone has choices, right?
Sure.
We have our choices between hospital birth and birth center birth and home birth. We have our choices about doctors or midwives, and even in the hospital space, you can have that choice in some places. So what do you want Black women to know as they're navigating?
See, a lot of times it starts with the reality, which is quite sad, is that they don't know that they have choices, okay? And so oftentimes we find ourselves in a place where we were provided certain things, and if it's not innately hard, if no one's going at you and stabbing you specifically, you may think that it's an okay thing to do, right? Whole time you have not investigated your choices and your options. Okay, so know that there are some, because you will. You provided standard care. You just get the standard stuff, and within those folks who are getting the standard stuff, right? 1/3 of them are going to end up having surgical births. All right, that's just the numbers game. Another certain percentage of it might be disrespected, anti-Black racism, more insidious biases, things that have real term consequences and have effects on our morbidity, mortality. Those are important things to know. So then you can decide if the things that you're just given, the things that you're just handed, is suitable for you.
Right.
Chances are, as a Black woman or Black person in general, if you sat there and looked at it and investigated your options, it's not going to take a brain surgeon. You're not going to have to do a whole lot to realize that maybe this isn't for you.
Right.
The statistics don't speak for towards you it being for you. The numbers don't speak towards this working out in your favor. So yes, you're going to be given it. So what I'd like you to know is, what are the other options, especially being we're going to say, a healthy, low-risk, pregnant individual. That's the majority of people. They start this journey healthy and low risk. How do you stay that way? How do you stay that way? Again, if you're just going with whatever you're provided, you don't have the opportunity as easily or readily to opt out of spaces that have been shown to be dangerous.
Right.
So, and when I say opt out, that is what I'd like people to look into. The alternatives. How do you get pregnancy care? How do you get whole body care and get through this process, which is a normal, healthy, physiologic, normal process? How do you get through it and get on the other side and be alive and well, healthy, thriving with your baby?
Thriving.
That's what it is.
Not just healthy mom, happy, healthy baby.
No, the bare ass
We
minimum.
want people coming out of this feeling good, looking
Wow.
good, knowing that knowing that their choices led to them being.
They have a hand in it.
Yeah.
Yes, they have a.
Yeah.
We do. We have a hand in being savvy consumers.
And not just a hand. I mean, that, yes, but you have the right. We have patient rights. And those are the things that I want more women, but people in general, because it doesn't have to just stay to birth, right? Healthcare as a whole. know your patient rights, and then be willing to exercise them.
Right.
When
That's so true.
comes
A
up.
lot of folks don't even know that you have the right to say no.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's just vetting. I think it's vetting your provider, vetting your labor and birth space. Even if you got, remember we were saying, like, even if you have a wonderful provider, even if you've got the white cat person or whatever, wherever it is, that individual, 9 times out of 10, is not the person to accompany on your labor and birth journey. So it's not you're going there for a saving grace and you're looking for someone to save you. That's not how this system is set up.
Yeah.
You know, so I would encourage people to look around and see what their other options are for more individualized care, for care that doesn't leave you slipping through the cracks,
Right.
for care that is respectful, for care that has outcomes that you care to emulate. So that's.
And I always say to people, you have to know that you have to maintain your power in the situation. Because if you walk in and just hand it over to them, anything, it's whatever they say. I tell my clients all the time, if you get on that elective induction train, honey, we all on the runaway train.
It's just what it is. Right. It's just like, I wish people wouldn't get, don't get bent out of shape when your course starts going left, but you did the very first thing, which is initiated the chain of interventions. That means that everything that and you're allowed to, I really don't care. It's none of my business personally. It's about being provided the information that you need so that you can make an informed decision. Because little had you known, if you got on intervention highway, that it would lead to the sequela of A, B, C, D. Now some people want to take that. That's the choice. They're sick of being pregnant. They don't want to do it no more. That's their own prerogative. But it's just the sad situation that people are led down the road of 39-week elective induction, never considering what the sequela of those choices could be.
Yeah.
Girl,
I think she opened it up for us a little. So
I want to go touch that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. I'm just so glad to see you in person.
I'm so happy too.
I'm so glad.